Hi guys, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about if the 2024 F1 season is going to be an interesting season. Obviously we're all excited for the season to be starting again. You know, at the end of the winter break, you kind of just want to get racing, get testing, see the new cars, see the new liveries. McLaren has revealed their new livery for the season. But a serious question to be asked is the season going to be any more interesting than 2023, or are we just in store for another session of Red Bull domination, with Max winning most of the races, probably even more races than last year? Well, the first thing I would say is that sometimes we need to temper our expectations for the season. It can be really easy to be carried away. It can be really easy to say that because it's a new season, because we've had more time to get acquainted with the cars, for the drivers to get acquainted with the cars, they're going to be better, the teams are going to have more learnings, when really there are a lot more things that create an interesting season. The first thing I want to talk about is the drivers. All the drivers seem to be getting a lot more confident and faster with these new ground effect cars, and that will produce closer racing and ultimately better racing for the sport. Obviously this can only get better, but as the drivers continue to learn these cars, how they work and where the limit is, they're going to become faster and racing is going to become more interesting. Moves that we didn't see last season are probably going to get pulled this season because the drivers have a better understanding of what these cars can do. So expect braking later, closer wheel racing, and probably more crashes than we saw last year. Now, other than the drivers, I would say the most important thing for an F1 driver to win or to have a competitive season is the cars. Now, last season wasn't the worst season in terms of there was close racing at points of the season within the teams, particularly for the second place in the constructors standings. But I think it can be fair to say that we all mentally checked out at the start of the race when Max flew off into the distance. And it's really hard to tell a race in which Max was given any real trouble other than places like Singapore. So the question is, are the cars going to be able to contest the Red Bull? Now, of course, we all have our favorite drivers and we all want them to win. But to be honest and to reflect realistically, I think it's not going to be that easy. If you look at previous seasons in which the rules haven't changed much, like 2017 to 2018 or 2018 to 2019 or even 2012 to 2013, the top team still remains the top team and the gap's still big. In fact, the dominant teams in those eras, Red Bull and Mercedes, in fact managed to eke out a bigger advantage because the rules hadn't changed that much. Now, in 2026, we're obviously going to get a bit more of an overhaul in terms of rule changes. As of now, it just isn't that much of a change in which would shake up the grid. Even if you think of 2020 to 2021, the reason that racing got closer at the top between Mercedes and Red Bull was because a change was made to the cars that specifically affected Mercedes' design philosophy, which was the low rate cars. Without that, and without Mercedes' early troubles in the season, close racing wouldn't have been possible because the W11 would have been able to just been upgraded. Now, this doesn't mean to say that I don't think they are uncatchable. I don't think Red Bull are uncatchable. I do think Red Bull are catchable this season. However, I don't think it's going to be as simple as we're going to rock up to testing and Ferrari's numbers are going to blow them out of the water. It's going to be very tight, and it's going to start off by they're nicking wins off of Red Bull, and eventually we're going to have a case of, okay, Red Bull could be in trouble in the constructors standings if maybe Checo isn't performing like he wasn't last year, and maybe we can have Max getting some competition up front. But I don't think this will be such a blowout by Max like it was last year. However, it won't be as tight as, say, a 2021 battle. That being said, I do 100% expect other teams to get more regular wins. Mercedes, McLaren especially, Ferrari. Okay, just quickly, I'd like to intervene whilst I'm editing this video and say exactly why I'm talking about an interesting season as the top end of the grid. A lot of people will say that certain seasons which may have a boring front end of the grid but a more interesting midfield and later end or end of the grid, back marker end of the grid, those are still very interesting seasons. Now, I am not disputing that they can be very interesting seasons. All I'm saying is that it is most important for an interesting season to have a top end of the grid that is close to each other. That is because F1 TV, you can do this now, a little experiment. You can look at basically any race in the past at least 6 years, right? Or you can go back to when Liberty Media took F1. Every time they show a race, 75% of the time they are showing the top 5 cars on the grid, like the P1, P2, P3, P4, P5. Now, these cars could just be following each other 2 seconds behind each other for the whole race, and they will wholeheartedly show you that, as opposed to P15 to P7 battling it out like dogs. They would rather show cars not overtaking and not fighting than cars that are overtaking and are fighting but are at the further end of the grid. Now because of this, I'm sure some people at the end of races, when people say, what would you rate that race out of 10? Some people may say, oh, it was kind of like a 2 or a 3 out of 10. And then someone would say, well, actually, it was like a 5 or a 6 out of 10 because at the back of the grid, they were making so many overtakes, trying to be a little smart ass. But we don't see that. It's all great seeing them on the left-hand side making their name overlap another name, but if we're not actually seeing the cars on screen, or at best we're only seeing it through a replay, when Crofty says, oh, someone's made an overtake because he's seen it on a replay, it's only adding to the fact that it's not that interesting. We are judging by what we see in front of us, and what we see in front of us is the top end of the grid. That is why I'm judging most of what makes an interesting season over the top end of the grid and maybe some of the midfield. The back markers, generally speaking, don't count that much. Red Bull and Checo to get more wins as well, and Aston Martin. I expect all of them to get more wins this season, purely because that they have more of a gap to grow. Whereas you see the top team like Red Bull, when they upgrade and when they expand, a lot of their expansions are trying to create something new, whereas a team like Mercedes or a team like McLaren, when they want to upgrade, oftentimes they just look to the cars faster than them. And that's one of the things, when you are that leading car, you are that faster car, it is up to you to create new developments. You see that with Mercedes in 2020 creating DAS, something that no one had ever seen before, and that being a really great revolution on not only their qualifying pace but their race pace. Ultimately, this season is going to be closer, and it is going to be a lot more interesting than last season. However, I wouldn't expect a rehash of 2021 Part 2, but at the same time, I would keep my expectations pretty high because of the way development works in F1, and because of the way these cars are all converging and coming together. It is inevitable Red Bull will be caught. One caveat I must say is the speed they'll be caught will be much slower than last year's cars or previous year's cars. Because if you look at previous year's cars, a lot of the aero, a lot of the downforce, a lot of the performance came from on top of the cars. That was very visible. You could see photographers taking pictures of complex barge boards that they would go back into the factory and analyze, why does the airflow like this? But now, apart from maybe in Monaco when they get airlifted out, we haven't really had a good look at all the different upgrades the teams have brung, or all the different components that make a team's floor, which is the main area of the downforce in these generation of cars. What makes cars like Red Bull so powerful in high speed, in low speed, we haven't been able to see what the upgrades they bring, because when they say it's suspension and floor related, we can't see that. That's very much an under the bonnet thing. So this will make it a lot harder for teams to replicate what Red Bull have managed to do and their philosophy behind making their cars. And so although the teams will catch Red Bull, it's going to be harder for them to take what Red Bull have learned and apply it to themselves, simply because they just can't see the upgrades. With that said, I'm very excited for this season. I am hoping it's going to be a lot more interesting. I'm hoping we're going to have a lot more race winners. We're going to have a lot more podium sitters. We're going to have a lot more records broken this season. And I'll see you in the next one.